Hello, Sean. How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
Welcome to the podcast. I'm very excited to have you today, and we will talk everything about metabolism. Let's start.
Okay, great.
Can you tell us, first of all, for our listeners, a few things about yourself, your background, and let's start.
Sure, I'm happy to. So thanks for having me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation. You and I met each other quite some time ago, so it's been a long time since we've been wanting to do this. So I appreciate you having me on. So a little bit of background. So I currently am a founding member of Calibre Biometrics, the reason why we met in the first place. But to give a little background of myself, um, I'm a 56-year-old guy. A long time ago, once upon a time, I was a pretty high-level athlete. I played in the States Division I soccer. I was a full scholarship athlete. After completing that, I became a very competitive cyclist, a road cyclist. Had a lot of fun doing that early on in my career. Became rather competitive at a high level. I wasn't able to convert to becoming a full-time pro and moving to Europe, so the universe had other plans for me. So I went back to my academic roots and ended up studying and receiving degrees in epidemiology, biochemistry, and nutritional sciences. So taking my athletic world and my academic world, I started coaching people, and I became known as a respiratory performance coach a long, long time ago. So I was teaching people about breathing physiology. Inside of breathing physiology, there is this wonderful world of breath calorimetry, which is the science of understanding your metabolism. We think of it as a ledger of your actual metabolism. As you're breathing in and out and ingesting oxygen and outputting carbon dioxide, you start to learn about the fuel utilization. So come full forward, I'm now here at Calibre. I was one of the original employees. I'm an equity owner in the company for full transparency. And we've been working on this for about 4 years now. The last 6 months, I would say, has been where we're really starting to take off and find our mature footing with our device. So we're well past the beta stages. When you and I met, we were very much in the beta stages. Um, so we've been able to fortunately receive some funding, do some additional development, and I've gained some partnerships with some really excellent universities, which I'll mention as we go through the agenda here. Um, but yeah, we're hoping to get people to understand metabolism better, hoping to let people understand that they no longer have to truly go to a high level laboratory to start to see some of these biometrics, which simply weren't available to the consumer before Calibre came along.
Great intro. So since you're a metabolism guy, let's start with a simple definition from your perspective. What is metabolism and why is it important?
Oh yeah, great simple question, right? I could answer that for 5 hours, or I could answer it really quickly. So let me do the
Yes.
quick one. So the quick one is, to me, metabolism is the understanding of how the body utilizes a fuel source to create energy. It's pretty straightforward. I think that's the simplest definition. When you start to get into understanding metabolism, I joke all the time and call metabolism currently a dark art because there's so many variables that kind of compound and confound the world of metabolism. There's over 10,000 variables you could take into consideration at the cellular level. So, but for most part, the people out there in the world who are athletically minded, looking at their calorie counting, starting to really take a look at how they utilize fuel to create energy inside of their body, they're looking at two different things. They want to understand if they're burning carbs, or they want to understand if they're burning fat, and they want to understand how many calories they need to fuel their activities successfully, whether that's for excelling in endurance sports or controlling weight or losing weight. Once you understand your own personal metabolism at the deepest level, you could start to make adaptations and changes to benefit what your personal outcome training goals are, if you want to call them training goals in general. So I think Calibre is starting what I think is an educational change in the market, because it's allowing people not to guess via algorithms, what your actual consumption and fuel utilization is. It's actually using the breath calorimetry science that's been around for decades. It's the gold standard of science for understanding utilization. We use that science and the equations from that science with our Calibre device to determine at a granular level what fuel sources people are utilizing when they do work, whether it's walking, sprinting, running, or whatever they do. So it's quite fascinating, to be honest with you, to be able to have insight. We kind of call it's the ledger accounting of your metabolism. Breath by breath, you're creating a ledger. if you will, of the fuel that you use, and we can now have access to that with a very cost-effective device. So it's really kind of exciting.
It is exciting also for me as a coach as well, because the first hurdle I usually need to overcome is the mentality of calories in and calories out. So,
Mhm.
what do you think about this concept? Calorie counting, reducing calories, uh, mostly for weight loss, I would say.
What do I think about it? Well, I think everybody has a self-responsibility that they should become aware that we are biological machines, right, at the end of the day. Um, I live my life in a way typically, and I break my own rules like every other human being, right, from time to time. But I think of myself as a physiological machine, and I like to choose the best fuel sources for myself, and I
Mhm.
like to know how my body is utilizing those fuel sources. It gives me benefit to know those details. Um, if I took myself, for example, as a person who had never taken a look at any of this information, I took a Calibre device and started using my device. Step one would be, I probably would be surprised how my body operates. A lot of people think metabolism is somewhat black and white. For example, if I'm on a keto diet and I intermittent fast all the time, I believe I'm going to be burning proteins. But then if I do a high intensity workout, my body starts to produce its own sugars. So I think there's a little bit of a steep learning curve for people in general to start to understand how their body physiologically operates. And the fun part, just to bring some flavor to the conversation, is every time a new person buys a Calibre, I will get emails from people saying, I think your device is not working because I fasted yesterday and I went out and did a workout today and it's telling me I'm burning more carbs and fats. And I say, what was your workout? Oh, a 2 hour high intensity session. And I, of course, say, let's go back to the beginning and talk about how your body operates. So I think understanding how your body utilizes fuel and why it chooses its fuel sources, it's a wonderful foundation for understanding what you ingest creates energy, and you have the power to choose what energy source you're utilizing based on your work effort and your work rate. I think that's fascinating, to be honest with you. And a lot of people, I wish more people knew about it and were excited about it because it's really kind of cool to know that about yourself.
So how do we tie, so in your perspective, in the people you work with, how do you tie then the calories in part when we actually learn about our BMR or our resting uh, energy expenditure?
Let's talk about RMR and BMR, like so resting metabolic rate testing and basic metabolic rate testing, two different things. We at Calibre typically focus on resting metabolic rate. It's a little bit easier of a protocol. It's a little bit easier of a test. There's not as much upfront protocol preparation. Um, so let's start with what do protocols mean to people when they use a device to try to understand themselves. So if you look on my website, for example, there's a protocol area. We give our protocols away for free to people. You could read through them and understand how we do those protocols. What's most important when you are wanting to learn to measure your own metabolism, start to learn your resting metabolic rate, which is the amount of calorie utilization your body uses at a resting state. You usually do that when you're fasted for 14 hours. You
Mhm.
don't usually do that after you've had an espresso or you've just done a workout. There's a 14 to 16 hour window of prep. Usually it's the night before you sleep, you wake up and you want to do this test relatively earlier in your day, so you're fully fasted. So you want to do this type of protocol testing in a fully fasted manner in a very rested state. So devices like Calibre and other breath calorimetry devices measure granular exchange of O2 and CO2, carbon dioxide. Any movements that you do, any work that you do elevates that exchange and the buildup of CO2. CO2 is the molecule that we look at specifically to measure and understand which fuel source is being utilized. And based on that, each fuel source has a different kcal count from a utilization perspective. And we calculate the resting metabolic rate, the utilization of metabolism energy at rest. From that, we can determine what your body typically would need to fuel itself for an entire day. It's a very foundational protocol for people. So it's giving you a guideline saying in general, and it can change based on your activity day to day, your body requires this many calories to make it through the day, to create energy to move your body throughout the day. From that baseline understanding, people can choose to believe they want to come in under that number or overachieve on that number if they want to gain weight and muscle. But for the people who want to control their weight or lose weight, it's a very simple concept. Less calorie in, more work creates a higher burn than intake, and you could lose weight or manage weight. And in the opposite effect, if you want to start to build muscle and more protein, you probably want to overachieve to start to develop musculature and so forth. So I like to start off at the very basic level. I think RMR is probably the number one thing that people should do with a device like ours before they even start doing VO2 max testing and all those other things, because it's such a fundamental element, whether you're a normal average person or a high level athlete. You really want to understand what your metabolism is giving you because you're gifted with a genetic metabolism. Each of us has an individual metabolism like a thumbprint. It's very unique to each individual. Until you understand it, whether you read books about metabolism or fasting or not, until you know at the fundamental metabolic level, the rate of utilization, everything else is a guessing game in a lot of ways. So I think this brings a lot of objective clarity to begin serious understanding of your own personal metabolism.
The reason I asked you about calories in and metabolism in general is where I'm interested is that I think, and I'm starting to also collect the data using Calibre, is that most people, typically also in their 50s, ladies who have been struggling with dieting, maybe, eat less, move more type of exercise. And I'm starting to see patterns where this particular segment of the population actually has a suppressed metabolism, right? So,
Okay.
and this is something that maybe we see because they cannot lose weight, for example, and they're not eating much. But when you also measure their BMR, then this is quite apparent that they're below the average, right? So I think it's good to have the data that and compare that for your body weight, age, gender, and probably having a low metabolism, which we can measure now, it does not help for weight loss, etc.
Understood. It's a very interesting thought. I think there's a lot of reasons why someone could have a low metabolism. So let's park that for a moment because that's a whole world that we could talk about. So blood marker testing, thyroid testing, all those things that we can get into.
Mhm.
Let's keep it fundamentally simple for the moment. Slow metabolism or fast metabolism. If somebody's a woman in their 50s interested in losing weight, if they were to obtain data from a device like a Calibre, for example, what they would end up being able to find out is at what percentage of effort, let's call it effort heart rate for the moment, because that's a simple indicator. As they start to go for a walk or lightly jog, they will end up seeing what we in the kind of industry look at, which is like a glycolitic switch. So as effort increases, the body starts to prefer burning sugar. It's a natural human metabolic response. So what are a lot of people looking to do? So in the big world right now, some of the trends, zone 2 training and fat max training are very popular. What does that even mean? People are looking to be able to utilize fat as the main source of fueling for the body. That helps very much so people with slow metabolisms and people who are looking to diet or control or lose weight. Because if you know at what level of effort your body starts to transgress and move into sugar or carb utilization, if you stay right below that, you're burning majoritively fat for fuel. So you're optimizing yourself to do that. With Calibre, or any device like Calibre for that matter, that has an O2 and CO2 sensor, you can dial in and understand where that transgression, where that crossover occurs, where your effort starts to allow your body to need to be able to either create its own sugar resource or it starts to choose to burn carbs instead of fats. So what I like to tell anybody who's interested in weight management or diet or has a slow metabolism, first, there's a lot of things you can do to speed up your metabolism. So I would ask them to look into that. We can go into that in another call one day. But you would really want to contact someone like yourself and do a test like that. But beyond a basic metabolic rate or resting metabolic rate test, you would want to start to capture data for a week or two from your daily activities and see if your activity is allowing you to utilize fat as a fuel source. Rather than a lot of people who want to lose weight, they'll go to the gym and they'll run as fast as they can for 20 minutes on a treadmill. And what they don't realize is they're burning sugar that whole time because they're working too hard to burn fat.
Yeah.
So I think there's a really interesting area, intersection of education, and one step beyond the resting metabolic rate test is, okay, at what level do I start to burn sugar? Does my personal body decide it needs sugar as its main fuel source because my effort is getting too high? And that transition occurs.
And I had actually a paper I wanted to bring up with you, which I'll do that
Mhm.
now, with San Inigo Milan, who I don't
Sure.
know if you know him. So
I,
he's
I do know him. I know him personally. Yeah. So yeah, he's a great guy.
perfect. So he's kind of a reference point when it comes to fat oxidation for athletes, cyclists, etc. And I don't have exactly the title, but of the paper, but he's saying that the athletes, which we know, have at rest, first of all, they burn a lot more fat for fuel, and they can sustain
Mhm.
that fat oxidation when cycling under a lot of power in very high rates. And that
Yes.
in his definition, this is also one of the hallmarks of metabolic health. Is this the conclusion from in your perspective and from the data you have that we want to primarily, first of all, during rest, to burn fat? So the higher our fat burn is, it's better. Or is there any caveat? And then what does it mean for athletes as well?
Sure, sure. So first of all, interesting question. And by the way, Inigo is one of the people that I look up to in the space for certain. He would say, and I'll paraphrase him. I want to be careful. I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I'll paraphrase what he told me last time I met him in person. He goes, I wish I never started this whole zone two thing. People have taken it and made it into this big thing. He's like, I was just trying to explain something simple. And so now he's like, I created a monster, kind of with this zone two thing. But I think at its core, um, if we reverse engineer the conversation from the ultra elite, ultra competitive athlete down to the normal human being, when Inigo was working with Tadej Pogačar, for example, who's the best rider, cyclist in a generation, if not more, um, what they ended up doing by establishing this zone two profile. Zone two could be defined simply as a window where you move from burning fats to carbs, right? There's a window of operation metabolically. And what they started finding was that the way the body adapts and the compounding metabolic exhaustion, if you will, is increased if you're burning sugar all the time. The body cannot recover as fast, and fat is a better fuel source for an endurance athlete. So what they found was by logging more training time in a zone two window, and by that zone two window, that's typically not super high intensity or high intensity effort. It's a relatively medium grade effort. So you're not over exhausting yourself, but you're training longer and slower rather than shorter and faster.
Mhm.
That allowed people to ultimately shift that window to the right of zone two training. So imagine we use 100 watts as an example. And let's say you're an athlete and you could put out 100 watts at a zone two heart rate level. If you did a lot of zone two training, you would want to be able to shift that wattage. You'd increase that wattage to be able to keep that zone two level of output the same. And so that's what all the elite athletes are doing. They're training low and slow for hours on end, and they're doing intermittent high intensity work because they're finding that if they could increase their power output without elevating above that zone two window, they're always going to be burning fat, which is a better, if you're doing a 6 mile race in the Tour de France, you don't want to hit the wall. If you miss picking up a gel pack, you're in trouble. So you're building what I always kind of say, you're building a good diesel engine instead of a turbo gas engine kind of thing. So you're learning to use an optimal fuel source. So you could translate that into the same thought process for a regular human being who wants to lose weight or control their weight. We're all zone two people. We all have our own zone twos, if you will. And at the right side of the zone two window, you start burning carbs. At the left side of the zone two window, you're at beginning your optimal fat utilization. So I always tell people it's great to use a heart rate monitor. Most people have a heart rate monitor of some kind. They're not expensive. They're relatively low cost and they're relatively accurate. If you understand your heart rate and your work rate, and you look at the physiological effects via a device like Calibre, we all can calculate our own zone twos. We all can calculate that metabolic window, and we can optimize choosing to stay in that window, or if we want to go above that window for high intensity endurance training, we can. But now we have the insight to do it, which has really never been available outside of a lab.
Now, for the, let's say, average person who is in their 50s, hasn't trained much, they want to lose kilos because they see they're struggling maybe in their daily life. That would mean
Sure.
actually that they wake up, they go for a walk, they go to the supermarket, or they go up and down some stairs to their office, etc. That in these normal day-to-day activities, not even talking about exercise, they can actually start switching from burning carbs as a fuel to start burning more fat as a indicator of also an improved metabolic health status.
Correct. Correct. 100%. So where this becomes difficult, and I'll try to keep it simple, is
Sure.
each person does have a unique metabolism. So it's very hard to generalize about this. But to your point, let's take an average person who is slightly overweight and lives a relatively sedentary lifestyle. They don't consider themselves an athlete. What are they doing throughout the day? Walking, going up and down stairs, going to the supermarket and walking. Walking is probably one of the best activities for a person with slow metabolism who's looking to effectively manage their weight, because you could pretty much guarantee that if you're walking, you're not exerting yourself to a level where you're pushing your body to really want to utilize sugars as the fuel source. Now, that being said, each individual have their own individual threshold. But for the average person looking to understand their physiology and their metabolism in a way that will benefit them if their goal is weight management, weight loss, they would want to understand how their effort equates to the physiological demand of a fuel source, pretty simply. So the range of watches and rings, I won't name any of those, wrist strap devices that are out there. They all calculate things based on heart rate, and they take that information, they use an algorithm to guesstimate what your metabolism might be, or guesstimate what your
Mhm.
VO2 max might be, for example. A device like Calibre actually uses the chemical compounds, the molecules that actually prove what you're utilizing. So I don't have a problem personally with heart rate adaptation and heart rate observation from other devices. But when it comes to dialing in and looking for your sweet spot as an average person, you really do have to, I believe personally, have to start to use a device like Calibre to understand where you're breaking the cycle. Because I think a lot of people get frustrated with their weight management or weight loss because they don't recognize when they're going outside of burning fat as a fuel source. And most people who want to lose weight want to optimize fat as their fuel selection, not carbs as their fuel selection. Now, we could talk later about diet and how that changes the equation. But at its core fundamental academic physiological level, you have the choice based on your effort level to choose to burn a fuel. And until you know how your body burns fuel, what your metabolic rate is, you don't have any control over that. And if you really want to take this seriously, you want to get a little sciencey, you want to get a little geeky because you want to understand what your personal body is doing. Once you do that, you have a much higher level of control and understanding. It's why constant glucose monitoring devices became so popular.
Mhm.
But those are also limited in their capabilities because they're looking at glucose. They're not looking at the other side of the equation, which is fat burn. So I really think it is a simple thing at the end of the day. You have to know your own personal data to start making market decisions. Otherwise, you're kind of playing the guessing game on a regular basis. And because we have individual metabolisms, it as a coach, I couldn't give you a recommendation. I could make a good guess at this stage of my career because I've been doing it for a long time and I might be right. But until I know your data, I wouldn't know for certain exactly what's happening with you when you're doing your work.
So let's start unpacking a bit. First of all, by what is Calibre? How does it work? Give us
Sure.
a bit of a picture of the device.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I can give you a literal picture for a second. So this is our little device right here. As you can see, it's a relatively small for people who don't know about these devices. Typically, any device that measures the things that we measure has a large tech stack, a bunch of hoses. If you Google search VO2 max testing, you'll see people hooked up to all sorts of equipment and hoses hanging off their body and backpacks and heavy equipment and three people observing you to make sure you're doing it correctly, right? So what we did with Calibre was we created a device that weighs 150 grams. It's very lightweight. It's very simple to put on. You can notice if I just put it up to my face for a second, I'm not putting it over the bridge of my nose. I'm not having to over tighten my device to make it a claustrophobic effect. So we designed a device that's easy to wear, simple and lightweight, and highly, highly accurate. But by designing Calibre, we did something different than everybody else. So for all the pictures and images anybody would see of a device that tests this type of information, they all go over your nose. They all have to be very tightly sealed to your face. Ours is the opposite. Ours is a device that we actually have partitions or holes in the mask itself, and we measure the difference in pressure from the inside of the mask to the outside of the mask. Nobody else does it this way. Why did we do it this way? Because we wanted to get rid of all the tech stack and hoses and everything, and we found a simpler way to measure. Measuring the difference in pressure from the inside to the outside allows us to observe how the movement, the volume, the flow, and the rate of your breath is coming in and out of your lungs. That's step one. Step two, inside this device, and any device that claims they can do metabolic observation, you have to collect oxygen, but you also have to collect carbon dioxide or CO2. I won't name the devices out there that don't have a CO2 sensor, but there are devices out there that claim to monitor your full metabolism and they don't have a CO2 sensor. What does that mean? Doesn't mean they're not trying to do a good job for people. It does mean that they don't scientifically observe that molecular exchange, so they don't have the variables to do the actual scientific mathematics to come out with the right answers. So they're algorithmically guessing. Algorithms are getting smarter all the time. AI is helping that. We know that. But as a scientist, if you want to collect metabolic data, you truly want to collect the exchange of oxygen and CO2 in the rhythm of your breath. So for anybody who's new or listening to this for the first time and doesn't know anything about metabolism, as your body creates energy in the ATP cycle in your body, the Krebs cycle, if we will call it that to keep it simple, inside of your mitochondria, your body is looking to utilize oxygen, the molecule, and a fuel source to create energy, either carbs or fats. Your body's work effort dictates which fuel source it likes. As it burns or creates that energy, the off-putting molecule, the output molecule, is carbon dioxide. By understanding the percentages of carbon dioxide that are coming out of your breath, we can observe mathematically whether you were burning carbohydrates or fuel based on the fraction of outcome. There's a range of what they call respiratory exchange ratio or respiratory quotient that goes from 0.7 to 1.0. At 0.85, right in the middle, you're burning equally fats and carbs. At 0.7, you're burning fats. At 1.0, you're burning carbs. That's been documented scientifically for decades at this stage. So we are, with a device like Calibre, able to show people that output based on their physiological exchange without algorithmically guessing at the variables. So a device like ours, and there's more expensive devices like ours that do this as well. We are scientifically, I would say, doing it the right way. I don't want to sound like a data snob or an academic, but I believe we're doing it the right way, the proper way, by gathering the molecular exchange that's needed to be able to understand how your body is utilizing fuel. Does that help?
Perfect.
Yeah.
I think it's very clear for even for beginners. You mentioned a lot of times CO2. So, and you mentioned it's an output of the metabolism. But my understanding is that it has a lot more functions, right? So it's used also to balance the pH. It may be reflecting stress, recovery. Do you want to give us a bit more insights into, the magic?
I'd be happy to. It's one of my favorite areas, to be honest with you. So as someone who's been studying breath work and breath physiology for decades, personally, also as someone who works with people who have very high CO2 tolerance capabilities. So I have friends and people I've trained who are world champion free divers, people who can hold their breath for over 5 minutes, some for 10, 15 minutes. As you slow your breath down, there's people who let's start this way. There's people who typically hyperventilate as breathers. There are hypoventilators as well. So hyperventilators, people who breathe fast and they typically have an analytical mind and they have high stress levels and they're over breathing constantly and they only breathe in their upper chest. That's a style of breathing. There are the more hypo-style breathers who breathe with their diaphragm and take slower, fuller breaths, and they utilize their entire lung capacity during each breath, so they're going low and slow. Um, the difference between, let's make those two groups as groups just for the conversation. So there's the hyperventilators, the type A's, the overbreathers, the overachiever types who can't help it, but they just want to do everything perfectly and they stress about everything. And the more relaxed people who breathe as a baby would breathe, a very normal, relaxed diaphragmatic breath. Each style of breath and everything in between those two polar opposites um, allows a certain level of CO₂ retention in the body as you breathe. The style of how you breathe dictates your calorie burn content that's coming out of your mouth, so how we collect data. So for example, if I use my device, if I breathe very slowly, if I manipulate my breath to breathe very slowly, I could, if you will, trick my device to thinking my metabolism is different than it actually is. If I hyperventilate, the same effect in the opposite direction. I could make it look like I burn more calories than I actually burn throughout the day because a device like Calibre is just simply looking at the molecule exchange. So what does that mean? When I usually have a coaching session with someone who wants to start to understand this, the first thing I do is look at their mechanical breathing capability. I want to see if they're an upper chest breather or a lower diaphragmatic breather. And I usually work to stabilize that first because I want them, while they're doing an RMR test, and we'll circle back into RMR as I bring this conversation forward. In an RMR test, what happens a lot of times is people will have the observer effect when they're wearing a device in testing. So they'll stop breathing like a normal human being. They'll start to think they want to breathe a certain way to calm themselves, or they'll meditate. So I could see people doing tests and they're breathing 4 times a minute, but in their normal life, they breathe 12 times a minute. But they're trying to achieve something when they're doing the test. So for coaches like you and I, the first thing we want to make sure we understand and let people do is when they're testing these things or looking at their physiology, they want to be tested while they're breathing normally and relaxed. They don't want to try to underbreathe. They don't want to try to overbreathe. It's very important. Why? Because my device is looking at the exchange and the production of carbon dioxide. If you breathe slower than normal, you're actually showing a different calorie burn than if you breathe faster than normal. And it's a very granular resolution. The physiology is more variable than most people like. It's not a flat line. Metabolism is never a flat line. So if I were to show you a mock data sample from me playing with my breath with my caliber, I could personally breathe 1 or 2 breaths a minute for an extended period of time. Most people don't do that. That's very low breathing rate. I can make my metabolism look like it's at a crawl, like I'm burning sub 1 calorie. But then I could switch to hyperventilation and I could make it look like I'm burning 9 calories a minute. And so my breath directly affects the output and it affects the data output, if you will, of how you're doing this. So what does this all mean? What's the lesson learned? More and more people really should start fundamentally at learning how to breathe as a slow, full breath human being rather than over breathing or hyperventilating breathing. Because when you do hyperventilate, believe it or not, you are in fact burning more calories because it is a mechanical mechanism. You're utilizing muscle and you are producing more carbon dioxide and your body's outputting a higher output of carbon dioxide. So a device like mine is going to show that. And so I personally am very fond of teaching people the full mechanics of breathing, that you don't breathe in just the front of your body. You must learn to breathe in a 360-degree arena. Um, People always, I have pictures on my wall, which I won't show you now, but lung tissue typically spreads along the lateral sides of your rib cage, not in the front. At the bottom of your sternum, there's no lung tissue. There's other organs down there. So if you're breathing only in the frontal plane of your body and you're not utilizing and accessing the lung tissue at its lowest state, you're not efficiently breathing, which means you're not efficiently calming your nervous system. And how you breathe affects your mental state, your heart rate, your blood pressure. Uh, it's been studied for decades how rhythmic breathing or calm breathing moves you out of the cortisol window. That alone could bring you into a sugar utilization state because your body's ramping up all the time. So there is such a deep connection between how you breathe, how your nervous system allows you to believe whether you're in a state of panic or a state of relaxation. all of those things have a direct connection to how your metabolism is working. So if you're a stressed person, you're not breathing well, and you're creating cortisol all day, your body is at an elevated state of awareness throughout the day. Your body then is looking to function in that fight or flight mechanism, which typically leads to more utilization of sugars. So there is something very important to know, that if you're in a more relaxed state throughout the day, if you're breathing calmly and slowly, you are helping your metabolism stay in a more stable state, and you're regulating it in a way where you're not emotionally getting tied to your calorie burn, if that's something I could dare say in front of an audience. So I'm a massive proponent of learning about breath and how it controls your body. And if anybody ever saw a free diver diving to 100 meters deep in the water on one breath, it's a beautiful race to relaxation at the end of the day. So learning to control your mind and control your body helps control dopamine, helps control cortisol, moves you away from all of those biochemicals that you put into your body through your exocrine and endocrine system that elevate your metabolism or shift your metabolism and exhaust you over time. So fundamentally, if there's anybody who listens to this podcast at all, if you don't go out and start learning how to breathe properly, give me a call, because it's fundamentally critical as human beings that we learn how breath affects all of these things that we talk about, and essentially metabolism at its core.
I see every day as a personal trainer a lot of people who are struggling to breathe um, with the diaphragm in order to create the right um, engagement to their core in order to keep their spine stable. And
Correct.
this can be quite dangerous and increases the risk of injury when we're talking about exercises like squats and deadlifts, where you're trying to uh, lift hopefully a lot of weight, but then you're putting your spine at danger if you don't understand that engagement. So breathing primarily, I would say, okay, goes into this sympathetic or parasympathetic system, but has many more dimensions that one needs to be aware of.
Agreed. Yeah, it's super critical. As you know, I think when we met a long time ago, I had spent many years talking to the world about respiratory muscle training and things of that nature. Because even if people do breathe properly or they understand the mechanics of breathing, breathing happens with muscularity and the strength and flexibility of the muscles of inspiration and expiration. And I think a lot of human beings just simply take it for granted. They think since they breathe every day, they're good breathers. Or athletes think since they're in great respiratory, anaerobic, and aerobic shape, that they don't have to think about the mechanics or the volumes of breath that they take in and put out. Nothing could be further from the truth. Um, we're born with an innate vital capacity, meaning we all have a natural limit that most of us never reach with the amount of air that we could exchange in our lungs. I taught people for years how to increase that volume capacity by building the muscles and stretching the muscles, the intercostal muscles, the diaphragmatic muscles, all the muscles of breathing, and as well how to access the 360-degree plane of the diaphragm. The diaphragm circulates the entire body. It's not just in the belly. So when someone like, I don't want to turn this into a breath workshop for you, but when somebody says the term belly breathing, it really disrupts my thought process, because your belly does not breathe. Your belly does not contain muscles of respiration. Your diaphragm contracts and pulls down like any vacuum would, and it pulls air into your lung tissue. Your organs want to be relaxed. So your stomach is a relaxed area. Your abdomen is relaxed to allow your diaphragm to contract and pull downward into that abdominal area. So I think right from the beginning, people get confused, and I'm very big on language. I don't like belly breathing. It misrepresents what actually is happening. The diaphragm muscle contracts and it works its way down towards your abdominal area. So you're relaxing your belly. You're not pushing your belly out to try to breathe. So people need to focus on that actual muscular movement rather than doing and manipulating their abdomen to try to bring air in. And if you know that your diaphragm works in a 360-degree plane, you should close your eyes and put your hands on the side of your rib cage and make sure that you're not just breathing forward, you're breathing to the sides of your body as well, because now you're starting to utilize more volume area of the lung tissue to be able to exchange oxygen into the bloodstream. So imagine your vital capacity is potentially 100%, meaning you have 100%, say you had a 5 liter volume, that's your maximum volume. But as a breather, you're only breathing in 2.2 liters per breath. Well, you have another close to 2.5 liters that you could utilize. And that stretching of the capillary, that stretching of the adipose, not the adipose tissue, of the tissue in the lungs allows easier transfer of oxygen to the blood. So as you go down to your bronchioles and you go down to the deepest layers of exchange, the more flexible that tissue is, the more able it is to move fluidly and easily, the easier you're exchanging those molecules from your blood, O2 in, CO2 out. So there's just incredible, massive benefit to wanting to know about this. I've been trying to tell people all around the world to get better at this, because once they get better at this, a lot of things in life get a lot better. Mind state, sleep, all these other things start to fall in line if you actually treat breath with a level of respect. And from the yoga world, my last bit about breath from the yoga world, which I spent, close to 40 more years in, the tale is a real yogi remembers every breath they ever took in their life. Now, I don't expect everybody to ever get to that level, but it brings about a respect for each breath, an awareness of each breath that you're taking in. And throughout your day, you should just simply revisit that every once in a while, because you're not going to pay attention to every breath, but you should take a couple breaks every day, like I do, set my alarm, take a couple breath breaks and reunite with your breath and make sure you're stabilizing that and using it to your benefit. It's a really important thing to do.
Thank you for the short lecture on breathing.
Sorry, yes, sorry.
No, it was
I
it
get
was great.
excited about
I
that stuff.
I think it's underappreciated, as you said. So thanks for that.
In our new app, Calibre app that we just released a brand new app. One of the things that I have wanted for a very long time was to be able to integrate heart rate monitoring data into my app. So when you're looking at your physiological metabolism, it's always good to understand the level of effort that you're putting out from your body. Heart rate is a very easy thing to capture. For elite athletes, we usually are adding the amount of watts that they're putting out, the amount of power that they're using to move a bike or to run and things like that. So we go a little bit deeper. But for the average person, if they were to use a Calibre and they were to understand what their heart rate is from their Apple Watch or a Garmin watch or whatever they have, to me, they have the two fundamental things that you need to start to understand your own physiological metabolism. You understand the effort level of whatever you're doing, whether it's walking, running, sprinting, working hard as an Olympic athlete. There's a work level that's been documented. Heart rate zones have been documented for a very long time. Anybody can Google heart rate zones and find that information pretty easily. When you tie that to metabolic physiology, you now start to understand that at a specific work level, your body is utilizing a certain fuel source. That's the key to unlocking all the information, regardless of what your goal is, whether it's weight loss or Olympics. Doesn't really matter.
Okay.
That simple set of data, those two types of data, will allow you to correlate and get a deep understanding of how your body's effort chooses to use a fuel source. From there, to me, when do you start to learn more about and benefit from this? So with a device like Calibre, as you can see, I jokingly would say it's not the prettiest wearable. People are not going to be wearing this around outside. We know that, right? They'll wear their Aura watch, they'll wear their Garmins and their Apples every day, all that stuff. But I kind of say my device is more of a conscious wearable. You put my device on specifically when you want to be testing something. You're not wearing it around all day long. So take myself from the beginning when Calibre was being developed. I was wearing my Calibre. Now I'm a little bit different than everybody in the world, but I was wearing my Calibre 6 to 8 hours a day. I was wearing it in the morning when I woke up. I was wearing it up until I ate breakfast and after I ate breakfast for an hour to see how I started to utilize fuel before, during, and after eating and see what my rhythms were. As I was doing that, I was always capturing my heart rate data with one device or another. So I had a nice set of data that I could start to look at. So I believe in observational data over time. So if you're wearing a Calibre device and you do one quick resting metabolic rate test, it'll give you great data. Just like doing a VO2 max test A VO2 max test could tell you if you have potentially good athletic capability or the ability to use oxygen for energy. But it's also just a single point of data. Um, no athlete ever won a bunch of races because they knew their VO2 max score. And no person who's looking to change their lifestyle, their diet, knows everything about how to change their diet by just knowing their resting metabolic rate. So for me, daily understanding over time, it took me like a good 2 to 3 months to know my physiological metabolic data well enough. Because even though I have lab equipment myself, I couldn't access the expensive lab equipment every day. And I have more access than most people in the world to that type of equipment. So for regular people running around, if you can get a device like this,
Hmm.
you can monitor your metabolism throughout the day. I have a personal protocol that I could share with people. It's very easy to do, but in the beginning, you want to capture as much data throughout the day as you can to start to know the biorhythmic cycles of your metabolism. What happens before you eat, after you eat, what happens before you work out, after you work out. It's not difficult data to understand. We just haven't been capturing it, to be honest with you. So what's new is really you got to get the data. You got to capture the data to be able to understand this. I think any average human being can capture enough data in 30 days or 60 days with my device if they really go at it from a disciplined approach. And by the end of 30 or 60 days, they will have a really deep understanding of their personal metabolism. And then they'll be able to look back. And I keep a journal, when I do this testing, how many hours I slept, what my hydration is. Not, I don't go into the hyper weeds, but I know my sleep, my hydration, and what I eat, and I know what my activities are. As I look back on that data, I do start to see my metabolism create connections to that data, and I'm able to see how variables in the utilizations of water and food and sleep affect my metabolism over time. So I wish I could say there's a magic silver bullet that in one test you can know all these things, but the human body is a complex machine, and even people like Inigo San Milan, who's probably one of the most knowledgeable about the body's metabolism, he would still tell you there's so much to learn. And until we have more longitudinal data, it doesn't have to be decades, but months at a time. We're still in our infancy in a lot of ways, understanding how this works. So it's an exciting time in the sense that technology is finally catching up with us, where we could actually capture this data at home, not in a lab. But scientists, the academic community, there's not reams of published data of studying metabolic respiratory exchange for months, let alone years or decades, like some of the cardiac studies that have been going on for decades. So it's early days. So one of our hopes with a device like Calibre is to democratize and make the access to getting this data easier. So we as a company can support universities, research institutions to study larger populations for everything from weight loss to COPD management to asthma management and all those things. It's just never been studied at scale because the equipment was too expensive and too bulky to do it. So I think we're moving into a new world right now where we're able to capture data at home that we never were able to do before. So for a geeky guy like me who's been wanting something like this for 40 years, I wish I was 20 years old again because I'd like to be at the beginning of all this. But it's exciting because the young generation they have these devices now and they could start gathering all this data and building beautiful data sets and correlations with all lactate, heart rate, fueling sources, all these other things. And we're going to become super knowledgeable about our own physiological bodies. It's pretty cool.
Cool. I hope that at some point also the data set is not also only personal data, but then we can create groups of data if people are
Yes.
willing to share, I guess, anonymized data. So then statistics become a lot more powerful. You mentioned before, and just mentioned now as well, about diet and the impact that maybe diet has on our respiratory quotient and what we burn at any particular time. Do you care to elaborate on that? Because up until now, I get the impression that you think, or that the biggest lever is exercise. But uh, let's bring diet into the picture because there's also the saying you cannot outrun a bad diet, right? So
Right.
where does diet come into play?
That's a very loaded and dangerous question. In a lot of ways. So yeah, I don't want to sit here and try to dogmatically try to convince anybody to eat a certain way. So I don't try to. I have my own personal regime of how I treat my body. It might not match up with yours. My life's journey, just to encapsulate this. So, long time ago when I was in undergraduate university studying nutritional sciences, I was on a yogic path back then. I was eating a raw diet. I was eating a very high alkaline, raw diet. No meats, no dairy, no anything. It was a study that I did. I don't eat a high raw diet anymore. But my personal journey took me down that path because I was interested in cellular alkalinity, blood alkalinity, and I was trying to make my body a little bit more alkaline than other bodies out in the world. And for me, during a yoga practice, I noticed simple things like I was way more flexible and my body moved easier when I was eating less meat personally than and when I was eating a high raw diet. That benefited me personally. I'm not saying that's the right diet, but that's some of my background in terms of things. Overall, I'm very much an advocate for the general population of like the blue zone diet concept, right? Good grains. You don't have to avoid carbs. There are good carbs out there, whether people want to battle with me about that or not. There's optimized choices. So at my mature outlook now on diet really is everything that you pick up is a choice that you can eat. Um, there's also guilt associated with eating. There's beating yourself up after you eat something. There's this whole cognitive, psychological aspect of eating as well. So it's a big, wild topic. Um, Two things I like to make sure I feel. A, if I'm going to eat something that's outside of my typical regime that I keep myself to, I don't punish myself for it. I enjoy it and I love it, and I put a good emotional attachment to it because I believe there's power in that. Secondly, I I personally probably have an 80% vegetable vegetarian style diet, and I do consume, very high quality grass-fed meats and beefs and things of that nature, but it's not the majority of what I eat personally. So I personally try to have a well-rounded diet. Um, that being said, what I like about studying the data of this is if you're keeping a journal and you're using data from a device like Calibre or even a calorie counting app, that's just a simple thing to do. The key is to understand how you feel when you're taking in that food, along with the data that you can collect with that food, because your body responds chemically to how you feel when you eat, just as much as it does based on what your effort levels are to choose a fuel source. So it's this kind of beautiful mixture of a lot of information that you want to take in. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question perfectly, Ben, but
It's
I
a,
think
it's a very good answer as an intro because I'm also a data guy, and my now brain says or wants to ask you. Um, so a person doing a high fat diet, right, who is primarily using fat as fuel, would he have a
mm,
lower respiratory quotient, or someone who can be eating a high carb diet, healthy diet, I'm not saying unhealthy,
sure.
can also have a uh, zero point 0.8, let's say, respiratory quotient after 14 hours after his last meal. So he wakes up
Yeah,
and he's
the
going.
answer to both, yeah, the answer to both is yes. They can. It really depends on what your effort levels are and so forth. So let me take the fat side of the equation first. And I won't call it the keto side, but that style of thinking, right?
Yeah.
Primarily proteins, primarily animal protein sources. Um, I think I mentioned it earlier. The most confusing thing I get from that category of people out there who prefer that diet style is they're shocked that their body, even if they eat all protein, they're still like, wait a second, your device is saying I'm burning sugar of some kind. That's impossible. No, it's not. Your body creates its own sugar sources no matter what you eat. Your brain prefers sugar as a fuel source than fat. There are benefits to ketones. We won't get into all that stuff right now, but your brain likes carbohydrates at the end of the day. And your body creates them, whether you like it or not. You can't get rid of carbs or sugars in your life because eventually your fuel sources, even if it's all plant, meat-based or carnivore-based, eventually your body is going to enzymatically break that down into essential amino acids, and then your body is going to create sugar on its own through a glycolytic response because at certain points your body needs sugars. So it's a very interesting point. I don't want to say that people aren't going to experience that. You and I both know there are a lot of animated thought leaders out there, I won't name names, who uh, project a lifestyle of meat eating and super high intensity active lifestyle. Um, if you're a A-type meat eater and you're working hard all the time, you are going to create and burn sugar in your body, no matter how much you focus on protein in your diet. So the first thing I would challenge everybody to on that side of the fence is if you use a device like Calibre, first of all, be open-minded that as you increase your effort or do a high intensity workout, you are going to create and burn sugar, whether you like it or not. There's nothing you could do about that. So don't get mad that that happens, but also don't blame my device that that happens because it is what happens. So I get a lot of people that write into us as a company and say, your device is 100% wrong. I want my money back because I'm on keto. I fasted for 3 days and da 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 da. And I just worked out and your thing said I only burn sugar. And I'm like, well, can you send me the data and your heart rate information? And they do. And they were doing a high intensity workout and they eventually created sugar to burn. And it's funny how they get mad at my device about that because they don't understand what's actually happening inside of their body. Now, on the other side, um, recently in the world of grand cycling tours, the highest levels of cycling and the highest levels of endurance athletes, all of a sudden there's now a trend where they're now carb loading again. The
Hmm.
carb loading is all of a sudden a good thing all of a sudden again. I did that when in the 1980s. It became, it's doing this rhythmic understanding now. So we're back to where, wait a second, carbs aren't a bad thing for super serious athletes. They're actually quite a good thing because your body uses it and it likes it as a fuel source. So on that side of the fence, can you eat a healthy carbohydrate, not simple carbs, but complex carbs and have a healthy metabolism and still lose weight and still bring your metabolism to utilize fat as a fuel source? 100% yes. Why? Because people who are typically doing that and are high level athletes, they're able to have a very low resting heart rate. They're able to breathe less breaths per minute, so their metabolism naturally slows down. And at rest, their body makes a quicker adaptation curve to that swing to burning fat. So when you're priming your metabolism, I'll call it, and your metabolism is used to having demands put on it rather than sedentary non-demand, your metabolism becomes more flexible. It adapts quicker to scenarios. And so I see that with elite athletes and people who stress their metabolism. They put ultra high demands on carbs, then they want to rest and recover. They make the swings faster. I would call it more efficiently. It's not chaotic. It's known and it's more efficient. For the people who are sedentary and have low metabolisms and are eating like a more meat-based diet, they typically don't have as flexible of a metabolism as I've seen in people who are active. I think there's not enough study done yet, to be fair. There's not a lot of academic studies that show the deltas between those two groups. I've been looking at 3,000 plus users of Calibre's data behind, kind of behind the scenes as an epidemiologist looking. I'm starting to see that that theory is, I believe that theory is going to be shown by somebody to be true one day, that more activity develops a more active, flexible metabolism, where less activity develops a more sedentary, non-movable, non-dynamic metabolism. So exercise in general is good. Choose your fuel source wisely. Um, I'll risk myself by maybe alienating a community out there by saying, I know a lot of friends who eat only meats and they only eat really good meats and so forth, and they do imbibe lots of saturated fat because of that. And a lot of them, some of them I've seen in some studies I've seen down the road, if they don't put fiber in, if they don't put some of the other components in, they end up having cardiac problems and they end up having other issues down the road. So no matter what your diet is, you're probably trading some benefits for some negatives, no matter what you do on some level. There's no perfection in diet or intake. Um, but studying with this type of device gives you more insight. And I think it's a good rule of thumb to be a generalist, not a specific eater. Any mono diet for too long has really never stood the test of time. Kind of thing. I do believe a bit of variety is a good thing. I know people will challenge me on that, and that's fine.
Thanks
But
for the input. No, I hope it actually creates a lot of discussion and comments because it is a loaded topic, but also now we put another dimension, and the dimension is metabolism.
Yeah.
respiratory motion, and but just as a practical tip to our listeners who might buy the device or might have the device, how do we test this flexibility?
Let's talk about that in stages because my first response is anything is better than nothing, right? To get some insight. So if we started from just looking at your morning, RER, and not every morning is going to be a full RMR test because to do an RMR, resting metabolic rate test, you do have to fast for 14 hours prior. There's a bit of a protocol again to do that. So I don't expect people to do an RMR test every day. Once upon a time, I subjected myself to that because I like being a guinea pig for testing and things of that nature. But yeah, if people really want to dial this in, and I don't want them to think of this as some onerous task. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to wear this thing several hours a day. Look, there's plenty of times where we're sitting around our house, we're not out in public and stuff like that. Well, I work out in my garage or at a gym. I wear my device in a gym. I get some stares every once in a while, but people are more interested in what I'm doing than looking at me weirdly and stuff like that. If I could tell everybody exactly what to do and everybody listened to me, which we know will never happen, they'd be wearing the device 3 to 4 hours a day at strategic times to start to understand how their body is reacting to rest, recovery, fueling, effort, hydration, rest, fueling, recover, sleep. You wear it at the beginning and the end of each of those sections for 20 minutes, and you start to see the rhythms of the body. It's a little bit of discipline to do that, but if you really want to understand yourself and make a difference in your life, I think everybody could pull it off, to be honest with you. I
It's a
have
lot of data, right? And one needs to know what to do with the data as well. Uh,
It's a lot of data. So great segue to what's happening, what's coming up in Calibre next, which is pretty exciting. So up until today, Calibre has really been, I would say, a little overwhelming for generic consumers because even though we put out really good data and we put it in a way that's easy to see and we graph it and it looks really pretty and all this stuff, they don't know how to really make sense of the data sometimes. So the next evolution in our app is reports that we're generating finally. So behind the scenes, we're almost there. I've been using them. My team is testing them and building them, and we have all the data. So pretty soon in my app, you're going to be able to have follow our protocols will eventually be built into our app. So it shows you how to do these protocols inside of the app. And it's also going to produce a PDF outcome-based report. So instead of just having to go into a big Excel sheet with thousands of columns and stuff like that and try to line graph things, we're taking the effort off of the consumer. We're doing the effort for them, and we will be generating outcome-based reports based on a session. So if you do an RMR protocol inside of our app, hopefully within 30 days, you will have the opportunity to get a RMR output report that explains the details. It doesn't make you become a breath calorimetry expert. So for us, it's a step towards getting closer to the true consumer who's not an expert in this field. We recognize that those people who have never been in a lab don't know what to do with this data. They need some guidance from companies like ours. We still believe that people like yourself, expert nutritionists and coaches are really still the last mile. You're going to be the best person to help them adapt and to use this data the best way. But
mhm.
we're working as a company to get the data to become consumer friendly and give not necessarily advice, but a report that would say, here's where you are. Eventually, here's where you are based on your age, height, weight, sex in your cohort group. We're working on that and so forth. So we can give some guidance. And then people like yourself and elevated coaches with knowledge could help these consumers take that and make it into an actionable plan on the back end of that. I do not believe my company is going to, for quite some time, we're not going to become coaches anytime soon. So we're counting on people like yourself who are educated and knowledgeable in the space to work with us and help educate specific communities how to use this data the best way, because there's no short of unique communities out there, whether it's keto or high level athletes or high rocks athletes or, you know, people with metabolic diseases. They all have different needs and different needs to understand things. So I'm counting on people like you, to be honest with you,
Perfect.
to
I
understand
think
what
it's
we can
the right combination.
help your clients. Yeah, you have to think of me and my team as a resource to answer any really deep academic questions about the data and how the data is captured, but helping coaches who understand metabolism convert that into training plans. And by training plans, I don't mean necessarily athletic plans. Any training plan for a human being to fuel and do what they want to do with that information, that's kind of your job, I see, at the end of the day. And
Yeah.
my job is to give you a way to help these people understand themselves differently. Um, I don't have enough time in the day to be on enough phone calls to help people, to be honest anymore. So hopefully hopefully you'll take that on for us and work with us to help deliver that message to people.
I think for me as a coach, I really think metabolism and the numbers or the that are provided give us a second level tool which will help a lot to guide the people. Just taking formulas which don't actually reflect the reality can guide to a lot of yeah, misdirections potentially. So I think it's a great tool. Maybe we can graph a couple of personas, if we may, just to see if our listeners also find themselves in some of these groups that
Sure.
I have in mind. So we have someone, for example, who is, let's say, 50 years old. He's have a high calorie burn per minute, around about 2 calories
Okay.
per minute. But he has a respiratory quotient of 1.02, so above 1. What is the persona you would describe here for this person?
Yeah, so this is challenging. So bear with me, right? So
Sure.
the first thing I would normally do if I saw that, if I saw a higher metabolism with a 1 point something, RER, for all the people out there who want to know a little bit more, it is very possible to go beyond 1.0 on the RER scale. So there you will see people go to 1.1, 1.15. Don't, if you see that with my device or my data, that doesn't mean these devices are broken. It's very possible for people to go beyond that. So let's park that for a moment. Um, the first thing I would do as a respiratory focused person is I would look at that log file, the data from that person, and I
Mhm.
would look at the respiratory issues first. I would look at the flow, the rate, and the volume of their breath. I would guess, now I might be wrong, I
Sure.
would guess immediately that this person might have been a hyper breather. They might have been breathing faster than normal. They might have had lower minute volumes, like a lower volume access in the lungs. And by doing that, you are propagating a higher RER capability because of the nature of how you're breathing. Um, why is this important to understand for all of the people all the personas that you're going to bring up? Um, Metabolism with a device and a protocol test for 20 minutes is a snapshot of things. And what people need to understand is it's very difficult from a 20-minute test sometimes to be able to fully understand that that's the best encapsulation of what your actual metabolism is. So let me break that down. Um, Typically, when I do RMR testing with any persona, I will put my mask on somebody. A lot of times you'll see the slope, the utilization of carbs or breath slope downward as they put it on over the first 2 to 3 minutes. Why? Because they're getting comfortable with wearing device and they're not observing, they're not breathing different. They start to become relaxed and they start to breathe normally. I usually throw out the first 2 to 3 minutes of data when I do this type of test because it's disruptive. They're just wearing it. They're maybe moving around a little bit. They're starting
Mhm.
to relax. So I look for a relatively stable plateau of data when it comes to their calorie consumption. It's a bouncy plateau because it shouldn't be a flat line ever. So for all the people who are going to take this test, regardless of persona, uh, do not try to breathe differently. It's very critical that you breathe normally. Natural human breath has a variety to it. It moves around a little bit. It's like HRV. The more relaxed you are, the more not the more non-rhythmic your breath becomes. It becomes a little bit, oh, it relaxes and starts to move on its own. So I look for that nice plateau. But my guess would be right out of the gate, because I look at thousands of these log files, is that he's probably capable of breathing slower, capable of breathing a little bit deeper, and probably was on the high side. So if the average human being breathes, on a good person, maybe 8 breaths average per minute, on a higher person, 12 to 15 breaths per minute, I would bet for this person and their size and shape that they probably were breathing faster and less volume than they normally could. And that affects the outcome of the data. So if you have a person like that, what I might suggest to you as a coach is if you see that, now let's say this person, I'm not tall, I'm 5'7", I'm not a big guy. I know what my volumes are because I've been studying my volumes for a while. If you notice someone going 1.0 and they have a diet that would make you believe that they shouldn't be on that side of the equation for RER, I would probably extend their test a little bit longer, and I would coach them through getting them to breathe a little bit more regular. So we actually updated our RMR protocol very recently. So if you went to my website today, I think we're going to be publishing it in the next day or two. You will now see us suggesting to people, instead of your breathing rate, we suggest you breathe 10 breaths per minute. Maybe even use a metronome to stabilize your breathing rate during the RMR test. Because if we let people breathe at their own rates, what we found out is they all try to breathe a certain way and they don't breathe rhythmically, and that becomes a bad outcome. So those would be my two tips. Take a look at the volumes, look for hyperventilation, ask the person, or even like I do at home, I have a little metronome app on my phone. I will metronome the person into a rhythm during the RMR, let them breathe 10 breaths per minute. And then eventually I'll turn my metronome off because they kind of go into that rhythm on their own. And I let them do the rest of the protocol then. I want them to rhythmically breathe and I want them to normally breathe during the test. And that will usually produce a slightly different outcome.
Perfect, thank you. Because also you did not mention anything about metabolic flexibility. So you say maybe how I interpret your suggestion is let's improve our breathing first, maybe measure again in, let's say, a month or so after a period of time and see what that means, and maybe make
Yeah.
interpretations regarding diet, metabolism, uh, uh, metabolic flexibility or so.
Yeah. What we found, it is very interesting, and we're very open and transparent about it, right? Our device for the scientific ones in the audience, our device captures data at 50 hertz. It's 50, sampling 50 times a second. It's very granular. Um, we've studied over the years that, how you breathe affects your carb output. So those are temporary plateaus and temporary
Mhm.
spikes. So if I, like in the beginning, I said, if I slow my breath down dramatically, my calorie output on my device will look like it's very low. If I speed my breath up, my calorie count will look very high. What does that mean for people using a device like ours? It's the averages that are important, not the spikes. So testing over time is what gets you to that average. So people can manipulate. I have people who hyperventilate for 20 minutes basically, and it looks and they come back and go, there's no way I'm burning 6 calories per minute. I don't eat enough to do that. I'm like,
It's,
well, the way you were breathing made that happen. So let's go back to the beginning. Breathe the way I tell you, the way an average human being would breathe, and breathe that way throughout the test. That normalizes or stabilizes the metabolic activity, which gives you a better look at that person's metabolism. So it's a nuance. It is not a perfect science, Pan, just to share. Everybody breathes the way they breathe, but we are leaning into the idea that if we use generic population averages and get people to breathe between 8 and 12 breaths per minute during an RMR test, that's going to produce a more stable, reproducible outcome than if they breathe however they want, because however they want might not be benefiting their test protocol.
okay.
So we're leaning into that control part of the protocol now. And I think it's going to be good for everybody because then we can compare apples to apples all the time, as they say. And every time you do a test on one of your clients, if they breathe the same way every time, even if they're a little higher or a little low on the metabolic output, you're still going to see the changes, the variety in how their lifestyle is affecting that output. So we've learned from the data that we've collected over the past couple of years that stability in the test is as critical as the personal metabolism of the person you're testing. So that's the direction we're heading in right now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. Okay, so let's look one more profile,
Sure.
if you're so kind. So we have the person who is burning less than 1 calorie per minute, let's say 0.9, and they have a resting exchange ratio of let's say 0.78,
Yeah.
below zero point 0.8. Uh,
Yeah.
what would be the profile of that person? Just
Yeah.
with
Again,
those two numbers.
I'm using experience to kind of come up with a
Yeah, exactly.
scenario,
Exactly. I
right?
have
So
those
yeah,
experiences.
so give me a little grace on this. But my immediate thoughts from my experience would be, okay, probably a more sedentary person, probably someone who breathes a lot slower, maybe underbreathes. I do see a lot of people who hold their breath for 5 or 6 seconds between breaths because they don't even they don't even think about their breathing at all. So I would think that's a description. What you just described, that persona is the opposite of the previous person. So I would think that we go from hyperventilator to hypoventilator. So I would believe I would think in this person, I'm pretty sure I would be right, that the rate and volume of their breath during the protocol was lower and slower. Doesn't mean deeper breath, but lower and slower breathing. And if that person is sedentary in nature and followed our protocol and didn't ramp their bodies up or their ecosystem, their internal ecosystem up prior to the test, they did the protocol right. Well, sedentary plus low breathing plus lack of physical activity, that matches that profile. So I don't know if that is that type of person,
Actually,
but
you got
from
it
all the,
not far away. So I think
yeah,
it's
yeah.
okay.
So again, I think again, I'm not sharing my log file on my screen, but for everybody who ever, if you share the log file data with people that do this test, how I typically look at the data in our particular log file from Calibre, the big Excel sheet with all the data, it goes from left to right, respiratory to metabolic. So at the far end of the right side is the metabolism numbers. At the far left side is all the flow rate and volume of the respiratory mechanics. It's done that. We did that on purpose. We like to start to evaluate a person. Even if I didn't see a person, I would look at that data. I would start in the left columns on purpose. I would look at how they're breathing mechanically, the number of breaths, the amount of volume that they're breathing. And then I would look from that and go, I already know what the numbers are going to be over on the right based on that. And then, so I
Okay.
could start to see if their breathing is dysfunctional. And then from there, sometimes I don't even look at the numbers on the right. I call them back and say, look, do it again and breathe normally, please. And because the numbers on the right aren't going to make sense right now yet because you are not breathing like you normally do. So I'll
Mhm.
have them take the test twice and have them get closer to that average breath rate. But for coaches like you and I, it's absolutely critical to understand that there is a absolute, almost, such a tight correlation between the rate, flow, and volume of breathing and the output of metabolic data, especially if we're only testing for 20 minutes, which even though that's our protocol, it's a small window of time. So if we're going to optimize the output of that data, again, my guess would be that's that person's profile, more sedentary, low breathing, a little bit less active than the other person. I don't have to even know who the person is now. When I look at my data, I see a person in my mind. I say, okay, that's a short person, small frame, hyperventilator. Their mechanics are going to dictate that this is what their metabolism is going to be. After that, I would want to probably make them wear the device for an hour, personally, if I had that luxury, because I'd go, let's extend it past 20 minutes and see if that changes. Because if you're surviving at that breath rate, something else is a problem. It could be your psychology, it could be stress, it could be a lot of other things. But for the
Mhm.
person well above 1.0, it'd be hard for me to believe that person can survive 24 hours a day breathing like that. Like that's a highly stressed individual potentially if they're breathing like that. On the other end, maybe that person's super sedentary and only eats protein, and maybe they need to start having a little bit more activity in their lives to start to raise that up a little bit. And they also have to change their breathing mechanics. So again, we're working within ranges of norm without extremes. We're trying to get people to breathe normally, shift their activity levels a little bit to start to get them to better. And if you guys like you and I have to do more than one RMR test on a client to get a better understanding, I think that's smart. If it becomes challenging because they're breathing in a polar extreme on either end, I usually like to say, hey, listen, this time, if you can't do it at my office, let me give you my Calibre to take home. I want you to do the same protocol, but then I want you to wear my device for an hour in rest. So I could see a more longitudinal perspective of the metabolism to see if the averages kind of work themselves out over time. Typically they do. Like I said, I could do 2 breaths per minute or even 1 breath per minute. I know that sounds crazy, but I could inhale for 30 seconds and exhale for 30 seconds. If I do that, my metabolism looks like it's the slowest metabolism on the planet. I can't do that all day long. Eventually, when I start to breathe normal, that average will shift back up and you'll see my normal metabolism, basically. So I think it's really a really good coaching idea. If you don't like what you see for 20 minutes and you see polar spectrum behavior, you probably want to teach them how to breathe normally for the test. Do it again for a longer period of time to make sure you and I get to that averaging computation,
Mhm.
than a short distance sprint kind of concept of
Yeah,
controlling things, right?
gotcha. Thanks for that. So, for the next few minutes, I have some simple, I hope, rapid fire questions. So,
Sure, let's do it.
a few questions, just first thing that comes into mind.
Okay.
So, first one is easy. Favorite breakfast?
My favorite breakfast. I prefer eggs for my breakfast, and I do two methods. I actually have natural free range pastured eggs, but I also have a vegan or vegetarian option where I use a mung bean egg substitute, which is a high protein count to it as well. So I switch between those two. That's my favorite.
Perfect, thank you. Fasted cardio or slow walking after meals?
Fasted cardio or slow walking after meals? That's a loaded question. I'll choose the latter, slow walking after meals, because I think that's more for the general population. Um, I think the first is for more specific population, so I'm going to choose the second one.
Good. One myth about weight loss that you want to dispel forever.
All right, let me approach this in a different way. So I'm gonna not answer your question specifically. So sorry. Um, I think the biggest thing that people do wrong, and I'll call that a myth, is they get too caught up in the viral nature of trends online. So the biggest myth to me is I don't believe you're going to be very successful necessarily if you follow people who are on the fringe polar spectrum of diets. So I hearken back to the mono diet thought process. I have never seen long-term success with a mono diet. So I think the biggest myth is that a mono diet is a long-term strategy for success with fueling yourself. I believe variety is better than mono at the end of the day. So if I insult anybody out there who only eats one thing and that's all they eat, I'm sorry, I disagree with you. And I think that there's other things that you have to take into consideration other than just weight gain, loss, and protein and muscle build. There's other areas of health that you have to look at. And generically, if you're following a guru or a thought leader, take a deep breath and re-educate yourself and orient yourself in a bigger way to the big, beautiful world of fuel intake. So yeah,
Perfect.
sorry. I know that's a roundabout way to answer
No, it was a good
that.
answer.
Yeah.
So carbs, friend, foe, or timing dependent?
Oh, friend and understanding of what good carbs are versus bad carbs. I'll leave it that simple. But I think personally, I have carbs every day. My body uses them. I know how to use them. My body likes having carbs in it for fuel source. At my age, 56, I'm not still a super competitive athlete. I will have carbs before I'm going to do a good workout session. Um, Otherwise, I'm not eating a lot of carbs. If I know I'm not going to be doing a lot of activity, I move to the protein side of the equation, and I scale back and forth. I flex every day based on what I'm able to do. But yeah, I think overall carbs are a good thing.
Okay, thank you. Best time of the day to train? Morning, noon, evening?
Yeah, I've played with that over the years. I think the body is freshest and most ready to exercise in the morning. But again, it depends on what type of exercise you're doing. So if you're going to wake up and not have breakfast and exercise fasted, I don't expect you to go out and do 6 hours of training. So it depends on the nature of what you would call training. So for me at this age, my personal decision, I'd love to get up. I'd love to do an hour of rowing on the erg in my garage. I'd love to get some good cardio in to stimulate my metabolism. If I'm getting up early enough, I'll have a protein rich breakfast an hour before I do that, so I could stabilize. Um, if I'm in a rush, I'll have a bowl of oatmeal 15 minutes before I do that, so I have fuel to get through the hour. But I do like igniting my metabolism or turning it on in the morning with morning activity. So if you had a choice between one or the other, I do think that's better. It's also better for sleep cycle. So once you get past, 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I typically think it's not necessarily a great thing unless you're 19 years old. If you're over 25, you typically want to cycle down after 5 p.m. and
Agree.
prepare your body for rest. So I'm a mature guy now, so I have a bias towards answering it in that way. So
No, makes sense for most of us. Okay, and last one. What do you personally do if you feel or when you feel that your metabolism is off?
Um, for me personally, it's a very personal question. If my metabolism is off, first thing I do is make sure I'm staying hydrated. Hydration is the foundation of a good metabolism in a lot of ways. So I'm doing my, you know, 10 to 12, 8 ounces a day, 10 to 12 times 8 ounces a day. Plus, I live in Florida. It's very hot here. It's 40 Celsius right now. It's summertime. So I need to stay hydrated.
Do
Other
you
than that,
drink your normal water or you add some electrolytes or any other
I,
little?
I, I do I do add yeah, I have a very good supplement regime. I don't over supplement, but I have a very good foundational supplement. I do drink alkaline water. I know that there's conversation about that, but I do drink water that has a higher alkaline to it. And I do add trace minerals
Mhm.
um, to my water. I personally do consume a very high-end shilajit. If you've heard what shilajit is, like humic acid, fulvic acid. I have that once if I'm sweating a lot, if I'm doing an hour or two in Florida outside, that depletes my mineral. By the way, I used to be a hot yoga teacher for a very long time. So I was in, 100 degree, 40 Celsius room for hours at a clip, getting dehydrating myself. So I know the importance of replenishing minerals, not just water. Hydration is a whole topic on its own. If you're going to drink a lot of water, please make sure you're getting your minerals and you're not depleting your minerals by overhydrating. That's a very important thing as well. Um, and then on top of that, if I see my metabolism shifting or slowing, I will incorporate, if I do it every day mostly anyway, I will incorporate a longer yoga practice, a longer stretching, slower work, and more movement of my body than exertion for my body because to me, that helps my body kind of shift into a slower mode while stretching the fascia of my body, accessing, moving the blood, moving the lymph, and doing all those things. And that's been a way for me. I use my device all the time. If I do a longer yoga session, I see a better regulation of my day-to-day metabolism. And I believe that has to do with relaxation, breath control, slower movements, more methodical movements, and not hyper high intensity stuff. So that's my way of regulating things. Hydration and we'll call it we don't have to call it yoga, we call it flexibility and stretching and movement activity.
Do you usually train this type of in this type of way in the evening as a relaxation mechanism
Yeah,
or
yeah.
independent of the hour?
Usually I'll do my yoga. I like to do my workouts early in the day, and I like to do my yoga routine later in the day.
Okay.
So for me personally, before I do my yoga, I'll do 15 to 20 minutes of cardio just to get warm because my body likes to be warm before I stretch. And then I'll do, anywhere from an hour to an hour and 25 minutes of yoga. Um, I come from the yoga practitioner side where I do a more historically, I did I'll call it a more aggressive form of yoga, a very, very demanding form of yoga. At this stage of my life, I'm moving more into the yin style yoga, the longer holds, the slower stretches, and I focus on being able to breathe calmly and fully in every second of that movement. So now I like to access my breath everywhere I go, and I'm a big believer of that. So I don't want to turn yoga into an athletic event, which a lot of people do. Now I'm using yoga as a way to explore my breathing and movement in my body so I could relax every muscle I have so my body could be soft and calm and allow what I believe the natural movement of blood and lymph and fluids in my body and the chemical movement of my body. I want it to be relaxed and open. I want to open up my body so that occurs. I have a psychological belief on top of a physiological belief that that's what happens. So faith in what you do is as important as what you do a lot of times. So I believe in what I do is good for me. And I do believe that changes your results as well. That's a whole other podcast one day.
I think that's a perfect closing line.
Good.
We need to have a strong a belief, and that actually is driven rather from curiosity, from listening to such podcasts, from listening to people discussing, learning, and exploring new ways. So I really appreciate what you said. Um,
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate what you do. By the way, if you would allow me, we've known each other or known of each other for quite some time now. We met years ago at this stage. I've always been a fan of what you're doing and how you're educating your community as well. And I love that you're science-based, but you're open-minded as well. I think that's a critical thing to be open-minded as a scientist. So I really appreciate spending time with you and also following you. And I follow your stuff and read your stuff and keep an eye on what you're doing all the time too. So thank you for doing what you do. I think it's really important.
Thank you, much appreciated. Uh,
Sure.
Maybe closing statements. Where can people find you? Where do you usually post most of your content?
Yeah, great question. We've been a little light on posting. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think we're probably going to end up focusing mostly on Instagram at the moment. Um, Starting next week, I'm actually going to be doing scheduled Instagram lives. So we'll be notifying people that I'll be going live and I'll be doing like thematic talks, if you will, about certain aspects of my world and how Calibre works and sharing that. And I'm invited on a lot of other podcasts currently as well. So I'll be starting to do more and more of these as well, which is kind of fun. But yeah, I think Instagram is probably going to be our primary for now, just because we don't want to spread ourselves too thin. Um, but our website, calibrebio.com, was just recently overhauled. Like the whole thing was completely overhauled. And we treated the release of our brand new app as a relaunching of the company, if you will. So for anybody who wants to know more, if you go to calibrebio.com, which I'm sure you'll share, hopefully you'll share your link, in the notes of this podcast. Um, we're really excited. For the first time, we actually are getting social proof. We have real users, people who want to invest in our company because they love our device so much. That's starting to happen, which is wonderful. And there's people doing user-generated videos and comparing our device to other devices without us even asking. So the word's getting out there. So we're hopefully going to build more of an educational capacity to our website as well. So I would tell everybody every once in a while, check in with our website. We'll usually post, there's an update on Instagram to direct people there if something new has happened. But yeah, by the way, we'd love to get feedback from anybody who owns our device. If anybody has a question, they could certainly email Calibre at our info address, which is info@calibrebio.com. So if I answer a lot of those emails personally. And by the way, I'm typically the guy behind the social media, not all the time. So if you DM us or send me a note on Facebook, most of the time that's me answering, even though I won't tell you it's me. So feel free to reach out to us there if you want to.
Perfect. We'll stay connected and we're waiting for updates from Calibre. I think you're doing a great service. So or I'm personally waiting to have you again quite soon on the podcast to hear all the news.
Thanks. Yeah, I look forward to it. Thank you.
Have a great day and many thanks for the chat, Sean.
Yeah, again, thanks for you. And thanks for everybody who sees this. It's great to be here.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Okay.
Bye bye.